Guys, it's tough when you're coming off a loss like this, but we got Ryan Decker to feed us the best information in Morgantown and make us feel a little bit better about ourselves. Cook, how you feeling? It's good to see you, Ryan. Ryan, how are you feeling? What is Morgantown like right now?
It's a different feeling around Morgantown right now than probably a week ago at this time. Certainly a lot less hype right now than we were. But you know what? I think that the big thing is, and Neil Brown talked about this last week too, even before the Penn State game happened. And I think he mentioned this on the Pat McAfee show too when he made his appearance there. You can't make a lot out of one game, win, lose, draw,
Right.
whatever it was. You can only make so much out of one game. There's that old cliche: you're never as good or as bad as you are in your first game as you will be the rest of the season. And the big thing is, and I've been preaching on this here for about the last week now. No matter what happened last weekend, West Virginia has to keep its head on straight, knowing that a very good Albany team is coming in here this weekend. You've got the backyard brawl next weekend against a Pitt team that they're going through some things, but still, it's a backyard brawl. You throw out the record books. That's that old cliche there. And when those two teams get together, and then conference play starts, you don't have time to kind of sulk and wallow about what happened on last Saturday. You just got to put your head down and keep going back to work. So I think that's the big thing here, and hopefully a lot of West Virginia fans get that. Of course, you're disappointed in the loss, but you just got to keep moving forward at this point.
Gotcha. And yeah, Ryan, I'm a little disappointed in the loss, but I'm a Mountaineer. I know we got the whole season in front of us. We still have all of our goals in front of us. Big 12 championship, playoff dream. So I'm okay. But I did want to talk about some of Albany's talent because they did have a quarterback last year that's actually backing up Cam Ward at Miami. So big time programs are actually looking at Albany football for talent. I saw that their receiver had over 120 yards last week's. I think his name was what his name, Seven something. But
Devin
can you
McGee,
talk
yeah.
Seven McGee? Gotcha. Can you talk about their talent overall on the offensive side?
Yeah, so Albany's a pretty good football team when you get down to it. Now, I think there's a question of how do they replace all of the talent that was lost from last year? That was a historic team last year for Albany. It went 11-4 on the year, went to the FCS semifinals, and played some really good teams along the way. So Griffin Woodell is the running back who was the freshman of the year in their conference last year. He's back this season. And then Seven McGee, the wide receiver who you mentioned, he spent some time in Oregon, I believe, prior to coming to Albany. He is back this year as well. So those are two key guys on offense that West Virginia is going to have to game plan for. The other thing that Albany has going for it offensively, if you want to start there, I think it's two freshman All American offensive linemen. That offensive line group is the most cohesive group in terms of what you brought back from last year. I believe it's three, if not four, returning starters or consistent contributors on that offensive line coming back to Albany this year. So you've got a talented and, at least at this point, a veteran offensive line coming together and a couple of good skill guys that West Virginia is going to have to figure out how to defend. Neil Brown knows that Albany wants to run the football. That's kind of what they hang their hat on. Now, the Great Danes didn't have a lot of success running the football last week against Long Island, but if you've seen any video of that game, I know there's not a lot of video out there of that season opener. It was raining, I think, the entire time. So you wonder how effective teams can be once you get into the elements of some things. So, Albany's going to want to come in and run the football. They just saw a Penn State team run all over West Virginia, so there's certainly tape on how to attack the Mountaineers from that standpoint. So I think this is a good matchup of which team can run the ball better, which team can defend against the run better, and certainly West Virginia is going to have to watch out for Seven McGee. Easy to watch out for, though. He wears number 7.
Gotcha. And then also the backup quarterback, because we know Puffenberg went to Miami. So what do you see in Albany's quarterback? Is he a dual threat type of guy? Is he a pro style guy? Because we had some troubles with Drew Aller, and he's not even a scrambling quarterback. So what you saying the offensive line is intact? If that's a dual threat quarterback, that could be a challenge for him.
Yeah, so Miles Burkett, he's a Wisconsin transfer. 12 of 16 passing last week against Long Island, only a buck 65 and one touchdown. Now he did have a 75-yard pass play to Seven McGee, which was only about a 15 maybe yard pass that Seven McGee takes the rest of the way, pretty much untouched to the end zone. So I think that's the thing in Albany's passing game. It sounds like is they're not going to lean on Miles Burkett a lot to make a lot of fancy plays. I think there is some athleticism there, but not nearly as much as a Drew Aller or some of the other quarterbacks that West Virginia is going to face this year have. But, he's a guy that I think obviously he went to Wisconsin for a reason. Someone saw some talent in him there. He's now getting this opportunity at Albany, and he can at least throw the rock a little bit. So it's not like you can, if you're West Virginia, just say this is not a quarterback that we have to respect. At this point, this defense has to respect everyone it goes up against. So I don't know if we're going to see a lot of scrambling out of Miles Burkett, the Albany quarterback, but if West Virginia's defensive players leave the middle of the field wide open and leave that pass rushing lane wide open, why won't Miles Burkett run up the middle and do exactly what Drew Aller did a lot last Saturday?
Right. I think one of the things before I fully look forward to Albany, because I'm still sulking and I'm willing to be honest about it, and call me a crybaby, but we kind of talked about it before the call from a standpoint of galvanizing a fan base, really getting the hype train going for West Virginia. You think about your 6th year in the program. I don't want to say no excuses, but no excuses. If you're going to lose, let's lose by 3. Let's lose by a touchdown. Let's lose by the spread, by what Vegas said. And I think to fall that flat on your face, take yourself out of just the reporter, shoes for a second. Can you think of a time where, there's been this much hype and, the team just fell flat that hard, and then let alone on week 1?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think really the thing that first jumps to mind is some of those Will Grier teams when he was here. Now, they didn't fall completely flat, I don't think. And obviously the jury is still out on this team as to what it will do the next 11 weeks, hopefully more than that. But yeah, I mean, some of those, and that was just because there was so much hype around Will coming in here. Maybe that was unfair to put so much hype on just one player who did some nice things at Florida, but obviously had an issue or whatever there with the suspension. So maybe that was unjust at the time with some revisionist history here. But I mean, that's about the time that kind of jumps out to me. I think there were maybe some years in the 80s and 90s, obviously before our times, where maybe some older fans would be able to point to and say, we had a really good team here and just didn't get it done. I know the 84 team had a lot of hype around it. And now, unfortunately, that's a lot of injuries that piled up and didn't let that team accomplish maybe everything that it was capable of as the year went on. But, I mean, and again, I don't even want to say just the Will Grier years, because that's unfair. There were some other things that happened there too. So, but again, it's kind of like I said off the top. It's one game. Yes, West Virginia did not look very good in that one game against Penn State, but at the end of the day, it's 1 out of 12, and now you got to go attack the next 11 with everything still in front of you. Because the good thing is, you fall flat in a non-conference game that at the end of the day kind of doesn't mean anything. The way college football is set up now, week 1, as long as you're playing a non-conference opponent,
if you do bounce back, that loss looks great at the end of the season. If anything, before I fully move on from Penn State, because I do want to look to Albany a little more on my side too, and I know Cook has a lot he wants to talk about as well. But just from a perspective of from my eyes, I don't think West Virginia was overwhelmed by a Penn State pass rush that, we heard a lot about this offseason, and that's not to take away from Abdul Carter or his partner pass rusher on the other side, I believe 32. Nothing to take away from them at all. I think, they got all the pressures in the world, but I mean, to come up with as little sacks as they did based off of the hype coming in, I wasn't overwhelmed by the defensive line. I wasn't overwhelmed by, the Penn State, receiver reputation that you tend to see. Do I think they ran some good routes and did some good things? For sure. But do I look back and say, oh my gosh, we got routed here or we got fully beat here? At the end of the day, we lost that game to Drew Aller, in my opinion, and James Franklin, knowing where to pick his parts and knowing where to coach well. Where does Neil Brown stand in this part of this as far as taking the blame? And where is it for Garrett Green? Because for me personally, I feel like Garrett Green just didn't show up. I hate to feel like, I put, pressure on Neil being the head guy, but Garrett Green wasn't Garrett Green that we became familiar with the last 11 weeks of last season. It felt like Penn State of last year, if we're being honest.
Right. So, I mean, Neil Brown, right after the game, he took ownership of what happened there on the field on Saturday. He said, look, it all starts with me, that he didn't have guys ready to go. And I think he was surprised by their performance overall. Not just the fact that they lost, because every head coach goes into a game thinking that their team's going to win. But I think it was just the matter in which the game was kind of lost, with West Virginia not being very sound fundamentally, which has really been something that you haven't been able to say about the last couple of WVU teams here with Neil in charge, is that they've been fundamentally sound. Other things have happened or whatever, but fundamentals have been there. West Virginia normally hasn't beaten itself, and that's just unfortunately what happened there on Saturday. So, Neil took some of that blame, but I think he also he said it, I think, diplomatically, of it starts with me as the head coach, but certainly our players needed to be sharper during the game. And then, he, without saying it, there were some issues on the snap quarterback center exchanges that it seemed like were on Garrett to a degree. Now, whether that was timing or whether that was just snap count or whatever it may be, I think that's more for Neil and Garrett to figure out. But yeah, I mean, he took some of the blame. I think if you ask any of the coaches, they're going to take some of the blame as well. And yeah, I think everyone knows Garrett needs to play better next week and moving forward. But yeah, I don't know. That was a team one. Unfortunately, that was a team wide effort in that loss.
So Ryan, like I'm getting this sense just around the program that we are trying to take ourselves away from the hype now. Like before the season, it was this is the best team we have. Like this is a championship team. We should beat Penn State. And I feel like that we got embarrassed in a sense. Now we're trying to back away from the hype and really, okay, let's just finish out this season. We still have a good season. It's like we're making excuses for the loss in a sense.
So I think it's more, not necessarily backing away from the hype, but I think it's almost to use a video game analogy. You get to that boss level in a video game, and the boss kicks your butt. Well, you go back down, whether it's a square one, the previous level, whatever it is, and you have to
we're not
work your
on
way.
all Madden, not on all Madden.
Huh?
Like not on all Madden level yet.
Right, yeah. So you work your way back up to that level, and I think that's where this program is right now. I think that's the attitude that West Virginia is taking. I'm like, look, and not to call Penn State the boss by any means, that there's at least, I think, 5 teams probably in the country that are better than them, but the boss level kicked our butts this time. We're going to go back to square one, and hopefully we can work our way up back to that boss level again. And by the time you get to that boss level, which this team is hoping is a Big 12 championship game, or at least a primetime game in mid to late November with a Big 12 championship spot on the line possibly, then you are back in control, and you're in a space where you can live up to the hype, so to speak. You can kind of be there and be ready for the moment. I think that's more so the attitude that this team is now taking, not necessarily backing away from the attention and the spotlight. I think any good football program would welcome the spotlight at any time, but it's just more so wanting to feel like you have earned the attention and earned the spotlight. West Virginia felt like they did that by the way last season ended, winning 5 out of 6 to end the year, winning a bowl game and things like that. But now it's, working your way back up to that level.
So I do want to get on some positive notes for the West Virginia fans, because we do have a lot still ahead of us for the season. But I want to get your 2 takeaways on the reasons why we were so unsuccessful. So I would say my 2 takeaways is the offensive line. The expectation was to get some push up front. I don't believe we got any push up front, especially on those 4th down calls. on 4th down runs. Quarterback sneak in with C.J. Donaldson. Even when C.J. Donaldson scored, there was no push. I don't even believe he got in. And then also on the defensive side of the ball, we're going against Drew Allen. Maybe he can scramble a little bit, but he's not a Daniels from Kansas. He's not, one of the top dual threat quarterbacks in the country. And we just let him have his way. We were mixing up zones. We were mixing up man. We were trying everything, QB spy, and we just still couldn't stop him. So I feel like that's the 2 biggest disappointments or takeaways that I have from the game. What do you think? Yeah,
so one of the things, if you just take the lack of fundamentals and this quarterback center exchanges out of it. You take those things out of the equation. The big thing offensively, I think, for me, that put West Virginia behind the 8 ball on Saturday against Penn State was that WVU was not very good on first and second down. Not sure what the rushing statistics on those 2 downs were, but I know WVU didn't move the ball very well on first and second down. Garrett Green specifically, just 8 of 18 on first and second downs. He was better on third and fourth down, 7 of 10 on those downs, but first and second, he was just unable to connect with his wide receivers. And that goes both ways too. I know there was no official drops in the official game stats, but you can at least think of 1 or 2 that probably should have been a drop. 1 or 2 gets defended, and that's where some of those disconnects are. Defensively, yeah, I think it's some of what you said, just between not being in the right spot, maybe not keeping your eyes on the quarterback if you're the spy, whatever it may be. But yeah, Drew Aller had a lot of lanes to work with in that game. He a lot of time the middle of the field was wide open for him to take advantage of if he needed to escape the pocket. The couple of times that WVU got some good pressure on him, the middle was wide open. He can just shoot through that A gap. So yeah, some of what you mentioned there was what kind of put West Virginia behind the 8 ball, what kind of shot them in the foot, so to speak. But yeah, I think the big thing, at least on offense, first and second down. If WVU is going to win this year, has to be better on first and second down. And then as it relates to the offensive line, unfortunately, Wyatt Milam, an All-American caliber player, doesn't get to play in the second half, just a full body cramp, kind of a shutdown type of thing. And that certainly wasn't aided by that almost 2.5 hour rain delay that the players had to sit through. Obviously, Penn State had to sit through the same thing, so no excuse there. But certainly your game plan is not aided when you're All-American left tackle. It just can't play because the body's just not working for him. So good news is, though, it sounds like he'll be ready to go, and everyone should be ready to go this Saturday against Albany. It sounds like West Virginia's in a good spot health-wise.
Always good when you make it out healthy. From a positive side and looking forward to Albany, it seems like Neil Brown spoke very highly about Anthony Wilson. He spoke very highly about Josiah Trotter. What were some of the other positive, notes that Neil Brown took away from, the very little of Saturday, if you will?
Yeah, so definitely 2 guys you mentioned there, Anthony Wilson and Josiah Trotter, have been mentioned a couple times this week. Jaheim Joseph, another guy in the secondary that Neil saw some good things out of. The main takeaway, at least positively for Neil, was what West Virginia did on special teams. He said if you break down the 3 phases, Penn State won offensive phase, Penn State won defensive phase, but he felt like West Virginia had the upper hand when it comes to special teams. WVU obviously makes a couple field goals with Michael Hayes. Sounds like for the most part, I think he was pleased with how the kickoff coverage unit worked. I think Penn State average was like about 15 yards per return there, which I assume is about an ideal spot for you. And then Oliver Straw, of his couple of punts, 2 land inside the 20, and Penn State had 0 return yards. So if you're looking for positives out of a Penn State loss, a 22-point loss there, it's special teams is kind of where to find it. I think I had someone say, too, going back to the offensive line that Darwin was just talking about. I think I had someone tell me earlier this week, Nick Malone had, I believe it was 6 knockdowns in that game. A West Virginia guy, a Morgantown native. I don't know if that stat is 100% accurate. I don't have access to a knockdown stat here, but 6 knockdowns, 5, whatever it may be. Pretty good stat there for someone who was making his first start officially at that right tackle spot as someone who's going to be dependent upon all season long. So a couple of bright spots there. One of the bright spots was not the running game. I know that's something that Neil was upset by, that West Virginia did not run the ball as effectively as he wanted them to. And certainly this is a get-right game for that unit in particular, I think.
And then when you say like a get-right game, is this a time to go back and try some of the things that didn't work well in week 1? Like, I know he mentioned in his post game, some of the motions that they, fumbled or, didn't go well. He had to abandon that from the playbook later in the game because it wasn't working. Is this the week to kind of, put it back in the playbook, try to get it working, and hopefully have it ready for Pittsburgh and Kansas when Big 12 play starts?
So, Darwin might be able to answer this a little bit better than I, but if I am in charge of the play calling here, I think I would almost do the inverse of what we saw last Saturday for WVU, where Neil said that things got more simplified later in the game because it seemed like the motion part of the offense was not going to work, just with the timing issues and those sorts of things. So he went away from that late. If anything, I think you start simple on Saturday against Albany. And then if you see those necessary steps, whatever those boxes that need to be checked off if you're Neil Brown, then you add in some of that motion just to make sure you're back on track, because you're going to have to run that stuff next Saturday against Pitt. You're going to have to run it 2 Saturdays from now against Kansas if you're going to win those games. That's just part of this West Virginia offense, is doing things in the backfield. And Neil said they were able to do some other motion type things that weren't timing specific, as far as running right behind the snap and things like that. They were able to do that as the game went on last Saturday as well. But yeah, I would start basic. If I'm Neil Brown, I would start basic early and then progress to that, hopefully when you're in a good spot and you're in a lead, and then you can get some of those backup players and maybe go back to the basics at that point.
Yeah, because I would say at the end of the day, we know Neil Brown plays work. They just didn't work against Penn State. And I just believe it was because they had an elite defensive line. I think a few of those guys were going to play on Sunday. A few of those guys were going to go first round. You can actually just see that they were just better athletes. I believe they're probably one of the top 5 defensive teams in the country. Just from the nickel standpoint, the DBs, the way that they attack. So it's just, I thought that we were going to put together a better performance on offense in terms of just running the ball, hitting the hole. A big concern for me is C.J. Donaldson. He's 6'2", 240 pounds, and it's looked like he's not hitting the hole. We had a running back in my day, Sean Austin. He wasn't even as big, but when Sean gets the ball, he's leaning forward. He's moving his feet. It seems like C.J. is waiting for an opening so he can actually get through that hole and then use his size like a Derrick Henry instead of just hitting a hole. So, what do you see on that?
Yeah, I think it was just the fact that Penn State dominated for the most part the line of scrimmage, certainly at key times in the game. And I don't know if those holes ever fully opened up at times for either CJ or Jaheim. I know Jaheim was not 100%, especially the second half of that game. And at one point, they just ended up shutting down Jaheim because I think it got to the point where Neil kind of said, look, it's not worth risking whatever cramp or whatever you're going through down by 22 and the game kind of in hand at this point. Let's just get to the next week and make sure everybody's healthy and good to go. But yeah, CJ, there were some times where I think if there was a hole, he didn't hit it as quickly as maybe he should have. But I've never played that position. I'm not going to tell someone how to hit a hole when my body's not in the line there.
You're 6'2", 240 pounds. Please just run through just anybody. Just go get a yard. So, yeah, I'm going to get off my soapbox with that one.
When you look around the Big 12, not really, great results, and not saying that, the Big 12 didn't perform well, but when I looked at some of the games around college football and specifically Big 12 members, Arizona is the only team I've really saw that made me go, holy shit, they got athletes. We do have to play them. I don't feel good. But when I looked at the other teams in the Big 12, TCU versus Stanford didn't scare me. Iowa State didn't necessarily scare me too much. When I looked at Utah, given the opponent, I expect you to do that, given your pick to, win the Big 12. What was your takeaway from, the weekend of Big 12 football and how they played?
Yeah, I think overall in the Big 12, things went about according to plan. I mean, in a 16-team league, the league is 14-2 after 1 week. It's much better than the ACC is doing right now.
There you go.
So yeah, I mean, you mentioned Arizona did probably exactly what they were supposed to do. Arizona State, I don't know if anyone saw 48-7 coming there. Now Texas Tech struggled, which I think struggling in week 1 against Abilene Christian was not something that I think a lot of people had pegged for that team. But I think there's a lot of question marks surrounding Texas Tech this year. You look at a Houston team, they lost and did not look very good. Oklahoma State sounded like they handled business the way they were supposed to, especially given the NIL snafu that went on before the game and them not being able to wear their QR codes on their helmets. But, the other thing was Colorado really had to scratch and claw for their win in week 1, and they've got a really good opponent.
Everybody who knows North Dakota State is a dog.
Right.
No slouch there.
Yeah. But I think I would imagine Colorado is hoping to get out of that game a little bit easier, especially when you've got a Nebraska team that I think really impressed some people last week. Coming up next on the schedule. So, yeah, I mean, by and large, I think this week went about according to plan for the Big 12 as you wanted to. And you look at some of the other conferences around around the college landscape. The ACC had multiple ranked teams lose. I don't think the SEC struggled. The Big 10, I think, it basically took care of business for the most part, especially some of those new teams that are in the Big 10. But, yeah, I mean, by and large, Big 12 did about what it was supposed to do in week 1, and if you're looking from a league perspective, the hope is they can continue to do that in week 2.
And before I toss it back to Cook, just from a scheduling perspective, I know like a ton of these games are scheduled, years in advance, whether it have been, Oliver Luck or, Shane Lyons, and we're finally getting to those games and, years down the line. We've heard Neil talk about it in the past, like he wishes we would open up at home. He wishes that, sometimes it would be an FCS opponent. Does this feel like, that moment where it's like, yeah, let's open up against a FCS opponent, get things warmed up a little more, and then take this kind of momentum, beating a FCS team 47-6, and then you can take that against a Pitt, a Penn State, a Maryland, one of your rivals that you would schedule in the future, if that makes sense.
I think there's 2 ways to look at that. One, yeah, from a coaching standpoint, you would always love to open up against a lesser opponent and then build up to a Penn State, build up to something like that. On the other hand, though, I can't imagine that you can get the type of atmosphere and the type, and by atmosphere, I mean the anticipation, the build up. The game was going to be sold out no matter what week you play that game in, but the anticipation and the build up to that game. And there was roughly 50 recruits, and it sounds like some pretty good recruits here last Saturday for that Penn State game. It's hard to schedule all those guys to be under one roof the later you get into the season. Yeah, it might only be 1 or 2 weeks, but just the later you get in, the more chaos that can happen. Because the other side of that is, say you open up against an FCS opponent and you've got Penn State coming in week 2. Well, if you stumble out of the gate against an FCS opponent, now your confidence is really shot, and you really don't know what's going on against the next week going into a Penn State game. So there's pros and cons on each side, and Neil has talked about this. He talked about it at Big 12 Media Days and talked about it, I think, a little bit in the build-up to this year. I think if you ask him, if you inject it with some truth serum, yeah, he would probably like to play the FCS foe and then maybe a Power 4, Power 5 opponent that maybe you care about, maybe you don't, and then have a rivalry so you're hitting on all cylinders at that point. But from a brand recognition and all those types of standpoints, it's really great to have those kind of standalone games almost early in the season and get those out of the way, and then kind of get into the meat of your schedule at that point.
Yeah, on a positive note, I would say this is good for us. Let's say if we did win against Penn State, we probably would have been on the high going into Big 12 play and even going against Pitt and maybe drop the ball. But now, with that happening last Saturday, like, we got another chip on our shoulder. We have to prove something. So not only are we looking at Albany, looking at Pitt, but that Kansas game, our toughest opponents are in the front half of our Big 12 schedule. So I feel like we're going to use this loss to basically fuel us for that first half of the Big 12, and then see if we can hold on and end up in that Big 12 championship. So I think this is the fire we needed, though.
Do you think Neil looks at it that way, Ryan?
It's tough to say. I don't know if he would put it maybe necessarily like that, because I don't think he wants to. You don't want to build in a loss, I guess, into your psyche. I don't think you want to make too much out of that than what it is. But yeah, I mean, I think Neil, just like any coach, if there is a motivating factor that you can add to your team, then yeah, I think you push that button as long as the button works. At least that's how I look at things. So, it's hard to say. It's hard to say exactly how he's looking at it coming out of last week. I think there's disappointment overall in how the team played, but certainly, he's looking at this weekend as this is the best FCS or non-FBS, whatever you want to call it. This is the best FCS opponent that West Virginia has played since his first year, 2019, when James Madison came in here and gave West Virginia some fits that week. So, you never want to go through the struggles that you went through last week. But man, if there was ever a week to get back to the fundamentals and make sure you're on your P's and Q's about that, you need to be on those types of things before you face an FCS team that is gunning like heck to knock you off and become up there and have their name go up beside Appalachian State and all those other teams who have done that.
No, that makes sense. Ryan, before we get you out of here, and I'm curious from my perspective, and now that you've heard the coaches speak this week so far, what are the keys to the game against Albany? What do they want to see in order to feel prepared for not only Pitt, but the Big 12 schedule? But just from your perspective as well, based on what you've heard from them this week, what do they really want to do to, gain a sense of security heading into the rest of the season?
Yeah, so talking about keys, I think we've addressed a couple of these so far. It's being better on first and second down, both on offense and on defense. That was something that West Virginia just didn't do against Penn State. They lost those downs on both sides of the ball, likely overall. And the big thing is, too, West Virginia wants to be a really good running team. They were hanging their hat on that streak of 16 straight games of at least 140 rushing yards. And unfortunately, because of some of those snap miscues and the sacks and sort of things, WVU didn't get close to that against Penn State, only 85 rushing yards. So West Virginia wants to establish that ground attack and make sure that is up and running, so to speak, pun intended, I guess. Make sure that's up and running for when you get to that Big 12 schedule. On the other side of things, I think you need better pass coverage overall than what we saw on Saturday. And the other thing is, I think, again, we've talked about this a little bit, staying, I guess, more true in your rushing lanes and staying true to your assignment, especially in that front seven of the defense, is something that West Virginia is going to have to do this Saturday to make sure it's in line to take those necessary steps to start winning ball games after hopefully beating an Albany team this weekend.
There you go. Man, Ryan Decker, you make us feel like we're right there in the thick of it, man. Every goddamn time. You make us feel like we're right there. I love it. And, you can catch us here every week. Ryan Decker's going to come with the best information in Morgantown, so catch us here on High Street Legends. I appreciate you, man.
Of course, guys, anytime.
Thank you.